We are 5 weeks through the college football season. Don't know whether to be happy or sad about that. A lot of good football coming up in the next 2 months, but obviously the season goes by very fast. Nevertheless, we got week 6 coming up this week. If you follow the channel, what I have been doing through 5 weeks is Sunday recap shows. The more I thought about it, at the end of the day, I see the numbers, and I think by the time Monday or Tuesday comes around, people are more focused on the upcoming week. I know I'm that way. I'm going to come on at the beginning of each week, and I'm just going to kind of get us all in the right frame of mind for this upcoming slate. We're going to do just basic storylines. If you subscribe to the channel and if you look at the channel, you'll see I do individual game breakdowns. I mean, this week I looked through it. I'm going to have 20 separate video game breakdowns. Each game has its own video dedicated to itself. So just to kind of get all of our ducks in a row, I want to talk about some of the biggest storylines heading into this week 6 slate. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. There are 3 blue blood teams that I would qualify as being in, on paper at least, bad spots this week. We're going to start out with Michigan. If you're familiar with betting and just kind of some of the angles people use in betting, this is not a good spot for Michigan. You went on the road last week to Iowa, which is a big test, and I'm not taking away from that. That was a big win for Michigan. Iowa's got a top 5 defense in the country, and for them to go and win that game by double digits, while they might have been expected to do that, it's still a big win nonetheless. But you got Penn State next week at home, with Penn State being undefeated. I mean, a lot of people, including myself, did not have that in the cards. I wasn't a believer in Penn State. That's going to be a big game next week in Ann Arbor. So what do you have sandwiched in between the two? A sleepy old early game in Bloomington, Indiana. We saw Indiana lose at Nebraska last week. This is just not a very inspiring spot for Michigan. Michigan's 21.5-point favorites in this spot. These are the kind of spots that I would not want to be laying 3 touchdowns with a team like Michigan. It's just that simple. And I'm not saying it's even possible for Indiana. They got a lot of issues, bad quarterback, bad running backs, some issues along their front 7 defensively. So I'm not even saying it's possible, but nevertheless, historically, bad scheduling spot for Michigan this week. Next is USC. What do we hear all offseason about USC? All they got to worry about is Utah. Utah is their only threat in the Pac-12. I don't agree with that, first of all. We've seen a lot of good things from Oregon so far this year. USC might not even be the best team in their own city. UCLA plays Utah this week, actually. I think UCLA might have a better team than USC. But nevertheless, a big game next week in Salt Lake City. Obviously, USC passed a huge road test a few weeks ago. Probably shouldn't have won that game in Corvallis. Coming off a pretty decisive win against Arizona State, you're hosting Washington State at home. Washington State's a team that preseason wasn't expected to make a bowl game. I think their win total was around 5.5 wins. They've surprised a lot of people, including me. I mean, they went into Madison, Wisconsin, cross-country road trip early in the season when they got a lot of new pieces, and they beat Wisconsin outright as 17.5-point underdogs. They played Oregon down to the wire at home. This Washington State team, if USC does not come correct in this game, if they overlook Washington State, they're going to regret it because, I've said what I had to say about USC. These first-year head coaches who, are going to value the transfer portal, that's great. USC's got a great talent roster. There's a lot more than just talent that goes into winning football games, continuity, things of that nature. USC better come correct because Washington State's a unique system. They're going to throw the ball a lot. And they do have what it takes defensively, in my opinion, to put up a pretty good fight in this game. I think that was worth noting as well. Lastly is Clemson, similar to Michigan, playing a clearly inferior opponent, but it comes in that sandwich spot. I mean, Clemson played NC State at home last week, big game, but Clemson travels to Florida State next week, and I think that's a huge game. I think Florida State has what it takes to beat Clemson, and not just in some if everything goes their way. I think Florida State's got a lot of talent, and I think they can match up with Clemson at home pretty well. That's going to be Clemson's second straight road game. You're facing off with Boston College here, who over the last 5 years or so, historically, has given Clemson a run for their money on more than one occasion. I will say Boston College has not inspired much confidence here early in the season. They look terrible through their first 4 games. I mean, lost at home to Rutgers, got blown out at Virginia Tech, and we know the quality of this Virginia Tech team, and then got blown out at Florida State. Now, they are coming off a win against Louisville at home. They're as 13.5-point underdogs. They've got the pieces. Like, they got the quarterback piece. They got a pretty good running back. They got Zay Flowers on the outside. With them, it's just up front on their offensive line. They lost so much in that unit from a year ago, and, that it's a bad matchup on paper. going up against Clemson's defensive line, which is the strength of that team. So this one's not realistic. But once again, just from a scheduling perspective, not a spot that I'd want to be laying 20.5 points with Clemson. So three teams that I'm not saying any of them are in real danger to lose, but in theory and historically, these aren't good spots for any of these three blue blood teams. All right, on to more basic storylines. Red River rivalry this week. I'll be there. This will be my 10th Texas OU game. Whole year leads up to this weekend for me. So hopefully my Horns take care of business. Obviously, I'm not going to sit on here and ramble about Texas. I don't talk about Texas a lot on this channel. There is a big storyline in this game, and I think it falls on the other sideline. Oklahoma. There's a lot of people that just assume that Brent Venables, who is a more defensive-minded guy, was going to come in and it was going to click immediately. Well, that hasn't happened. I mean, they're 0-2 in Big 12 play, lost decisively at home to Kansas State, and then got embarrassed on a national stage this past week at TCU. Now, I think TCU is a really good offense. And, if Dylan Gabriel stays in that game, probably putting up more than 24 points, but a pretty embarrassing performance nonetheless. I think we're going to find out this week. And I think this is a huge storyline. People thought OU was a legitimate playoff contender coming into the year. That's obviously not the case anymore, but I think the biggest storyline in this game is Oklahoma falling this far early on. I don't think that if they have, it's necessarily an indictment on Brent Venables. I say this so much. It is hard for first-year head coaches who come in as an outsider. I mean, it was different when Lincoln Riley, who was a part of that staff for years, inherited that team from Bob Stoops. I think that's just a little bit of a different situation. Brent Venables is coming in from Clemson. He hasn't been at Oklahoma in 10 years. You got all the talent that transferred out of that program. It's just a tough spot to come into. So if they lose this game, which I hope they do, they're 7-point underdogs on a neutral site to Texas. I do think there's a world, especially if Dylan Gabriel doesn't play, where Oklahoma can lose this game, but actually kind of show promise. Because if these first two conference games have shown anything, this is a team that could legitimately lose 5, 6, 7 games this year. And nobody saw that coming. I played them under the 9.5 wins, but I was thinking more 8-4. So if they lose in decisive fashion once again to Texas this week, I think that's a major story in college football, especially considering where they were valued coming into the year. So it'll be interesting to see. Rivalry game. I remember back in 2015, Texas, that was the worst Texas team that I've seen in my life. Ended up going 5-7 that year, but it was much worse than that. Not all 5-7s are created equally. That was a bad football team. We're going up against Oklahoma, who had Baker Mayfield. Oklahoma made the playoff that year, and that was their only regular season loss. We beat them. So things can happen, and especially in this environment. I'm not going to ramble on. I could make a whole soliloquy about the Cotton Bowl, but we'll move on. I'm going to stick in the Big 12 and just say, TCU or Kansas is going to be undefeated coming out of this Week 6 slate, which coming into the year, nobody thought that would happen. Obviously, it was probably a little bit more believable on the TCU side, but given they played SMU already, given they already had to play OU, still don't think there was very many people that had them as undefeated at this point. But obviously with Kansas, the streak continues. I bet against Kansas this last week. I was wrong, but they've stacked up some pretty good wins. It's not like they've played total nobodies. Duke was a pretty easy draw, but going on the road back-to-back weeks and beating West Virginia and Houston, yes, both those teams have some pretty major flaws, but we're talking about a Kansas team that was projected to win 2.5 games coming into the year. So a 5-0 start is a 5-0 start, and their defense stepped up big time against Iowa State this past week. I'm gonna get into that game a lot later throughout the week, but a big storyline is going to be around one of those two programs. Moving on to the SEC, Tennessee, they're undefeated at this point. They're going on the road to Baton Rouge. Can they stay undefeated in a historically tough place to play? I bet against LSU this past week when they traveled to Jordan-Hare. I think I was on an island there. I probably saw about 30, 35 people give out LSU -9 as their mega whale best bet. I was on the other side. I was right. I think that this LSU team's got major flaws. Most of that falls on their offensive line, but if you can't protect the quarterback, though, your offensive efficiency is going to shrink to a fraction of what it should be. That's why I'm not as high on them as a lot of people are. I think Jaden Daniels has been able to mask a lot of those problems, but, I do think they got some bigger issues and it's, once again, it's not an indictment on Brian Kelly. It's his first year. But on the other hand, it's Baton Rouge. It's Death Valley. It's a tough place to play. Winning on the road in any conference, but especially the SEC, is hard. We saw Tennessee earlier this year travel to Pitt. To be honest with you, if Keaton Slovis doesn't get hurt, Pittsburgh wins that game. I thought when he went down right before the half, I thought Tennessee was going to pull away and possibly win that game by 2 or 3 possessions. They didn't. They played a sloppy second half on the road. Pitt's defense really stepped up. And, if they had just a competent quarterback out there, Pitt probably would have found a way to win that game. So that's the only time we've seen Tennessee on the road this year. There's a lot to like about Tennessee. I've sprinkled on Hendon Hooker to win the Heisman Trophy. Given the way he takes care of the football, his threat as a thrower, his threat as a runner, there's really, and just Tennessee's overall ability to establish the run and the maniacal fast pace they run at, there's really not much to dislike about that Tennessee offense. I do think they've allowed way too many explosive plays defensively. We saw it against Anthony Richardson in Florida. I mean, go look at Anthony Richardson and how he fared against Kentucky and South Florida, and then look what he did to that Tennessee defense. Even Pittsburgh was able to break off a slew of explosive plays in that game. So this is going to be a big test on a national stage for Tennessee. Obviously and I can relate as a Texas fan. It's a program that's over the last 15, maybe even 20 years for them, has just not been up to par with their historical standard. I think we all know that this is a much improved version of Tennessee. It's a much more entertaining Tennessee at the very least. But these are the types of games that if you're truly a national contender, if you're truly a top 10 team, you got to go in and take care of business against a team that's got clear matchup disadvantages. So I think if you're a Tennessee fan, you're glad this game is at 11 a.m. That's for sure. How about Arkansas? I mean, obviously they start the year off 3-0, 3 wins at home, but they've had a tough last 2 weeks. I mean, the way they lost to Texas A&M on that last second field goal, and probably in the bigger picture, fumbling on the goal line, having A&M return it all the way back. That's a 2-touchdown swing. That was the deciding factor in that loss. Just a frustrating loss. And then obviously coming back home, showed some good things against Alabama, but we saw Arkansas's defense just get, pantsed in a lot of ways in that game. And you can say it's Alabama, but look at how Alabama's fared on the road these past 2 years. They're not doing that to a lot of teams. And we've seen Arkansas's defense have some real red flags all year. So nevertheless, we're going to get more into those matchups throughout the week, but just bigger storyline here. They've lost their last 2 games. I mean, whoever made this Arkansas schedule is a nut job. Look at this. So you play A&M, you play Alabama, you got 2 straight road games at Mississippi State, and part of this is conference play. You can't avoid it. You travel to Mississippi State this week, and then you go to BYU, middle of the season, smack dab in the middle of conference play, cross-country trip, and BYU is a really solid team. That is clearly a winnable game for BYU. So, in my opinion, given how tough that spot is next week, if Arkansas wants to, still have all their goals in front of them throughout the rest of the season, which, I mean, probably not going to compete for the SEC West at this point. I think that's out the window. But if they want to win 8 games, I think you got to beat Mississippi State this week. I really do. Now, things do get easier for them at the end of the year. They might go 5-0 down the stretch of the season. This 4-game stretch is just tough, and that A&M loss certainly hurts even more in retrospect. But, I mean, playing at Mississippi State, I know there's 5.5, 6-point underdogs. This is a game that if you're an Arkansas fan, you feel like you got to have this game. Obviously, Mississippi State's a team. The betting markets have been high on them all year. They smoked Texas A&M last week. Second straight home game for the Bulldogs, getting a lot of love once again this week. I think you're going to see just a balls to the wall effort from Arkansas, though, because this is a game they got to have. Usually when I talk about the Pac-12 on here, it doesn't get a lot of reception, but let's not overlook the matchup we have at the Rose Bowl this week. Utah going to take on UCLA. I said it earlier in this video. UCLA might be the best team in the city of Los Angeles. I really believe it. I've believed it for a while now. I played them over the 8.5 wins preseason. Picked up a huge win last week against Washington on Friday night. I mean, there's a lot to like about UCLA's offense. DTR is a 5th-year starting quarterback. Zach Charbonnet is, just because he transferred from Michigan and people don't really watch him as much as they used to anymore, he's that same guy. He's a physical back. He's a bruiser. He's a really good player. And they got Chip Kelly. I think a lot of people forgot how much of an offensive genius Chip Kelly is, just because it took him a while to build UCLA back up. And so I think over the last 5 years, when you talk about great offensive minds in college football, you don't really hear Chip Kelly's name mentioned anymore. It's only because he took over a rebuilding job. He hasn't lost a step. If you watch the last Friday's game, you'd understand that. Obviously, they stepped up last week as underdogs at home. They're going to have to do it once again. Utah won the Pac-12 last year in decisive fashion, I might add. Obviously dropped that opener against Florida, but they've looked good since then. I mean, they just blew out Oregon State at home. This is a little bit of a clash of styles here. Utah is more of a traditional, want to run the football. Cam Rising is more of a, I don't want to say he's just a game manager, but he's not going to be chucking the ball around 35, 40 times a game. I could see a situation where Chip Kelly puts the ball in DTR's hands and saying, you're running it 20 times, you're throwing it 40. We're putting the game in your hands. This is going to be a great game to watch just because it's in the Pac-12 and people, I know why the Pac-12 isn't as popular. This is going to be a really high-level football game. I want to talk about Georgia for a second. These past few weeks have just shown you can't ever take the philosophy of, oh, this team is going to do blank to anybody they play on their schedule. I kind of said coming into the season, I feel like Ohio State can put 40 on anybody they play. And automatically in week 1, Notre Dame held them to 21 points. And these past 2 weeks with Georgia, they looked so good the first 3 weeks of the season that, we all started to believe that they're going to beat everybody by 35. Maybe not Tennessee, but I mean, there's no way Missouri is going to play them close, right? Wrong. It turns out that when you're Georgia, when you're the defending national champion, I don't care who you're playing, you're going to get everybody's best shot. Every coach's best shot, every opposing player's best shot, every fan base's best shot. So we saw Georgia struggle last week and even the week before against Kent State. You're coming back home and you're playing Auburn. You're 30-point favorites in this game. So obviously the betting markets haven't really downgraded Georgia. And you know what? I tend to agree with that. I don't think that the slip-ups they've had the last few weeks, they won both those games. And that's really the most important thing. Because for as much struggle as they went through, I think they made up for it with how they looked against Oregon and on the road against South Carolina. Come back and play in Auburn here. I got to tell you, I don't know how much Auburn has left in the tank. I'm surprised. I'm recording this on Monday night. I'm surprised we haven't heard Brian Harsin getting fired yet. And not necessarily because I think that's the right way to go about it, but just because there's so much heat there and the way they lost against LSU last week. It's just hard to believe that he's going to actually, be allowed to coach this game by those, fans, boosters, administration, whatever you want to call it. But with Auburn and the way their last 2 weeks have played out, I mean, think about it. It was a miracle that they won at home against Missouri with the missed field goal at the end of regulation, with Missouri fumbling on the 1-yard line in overtime. Just an emotional win, a game that you stole, a game you shouldn't have. You should have had this past week against LSU, but turnovers in the fourth quarter. And just, I mean, you outgained LSU by 150 yards, found a way to lose that game down the stretch. Coming off these past 2 weeks, we could see a legitimately flat performance from Auburn here. And then maybe that's the end of the Harsin era. I don't know. We'll see how it plays out. It's going to be a big storyline to follow. We'll see if Georgia, who in my opinion, even amidst these past 2 weeks, is still the best team in the country. The way I think this game will play out, and I'm not saying I'm laying 30 points with Georgia here. I might not. This is a game that Georgia should be able to name their number. All right, want to take a break in the action real quick. I know you've been staring at the shirt the whole time, going with the space theme today. If you're looking at the specimen on your screen and saying, how can I look as cool and sexy as that guy on my screen? I'll tell you, proud90.com. Unique but very comfortable polos as well. They've also got t-shirts, hoodies, quarter zips. They recently added a ladies line. Proud 90's got all your golf apparel needs. Go to proud90.com. That's proud90.com. Browse their selection. If you see anything you like at checkout, use code Fordham. Going to get you 15% off your entire order. Code Fordham gets you 15% off your entire order. Support me, support Proud 90. The rest of the information will be in the description. Let's get right back into the video. We haven't seen Miami since that Middle Tennessee State loss. Really, and I've said this a few times, Miami just took an arrogant approach into that game. The way, especially defensively, I mean, yeah, they turned the ball over their first 3 possessions offensively. That can't happen, but they were just playing man coverage all day against a team that can beat you deep, and they failed to adjust. And Chase Cunningham for Middle Tennessee State was 16 of 25 for 408 yards. That is an unthinkable, yards per, it's over 25 yards per completion. Kind of got brought back down to earth a little bit, but you've got a North Carolina team coming in that, obviously got exposed a little bit against Notre Dame. They're not good defensively. If there was ever a spot for Miami to get right, establish some sort of run game, get one of those 2 quarterbacks in a rhythm, it would be this spot on paper. But, Mario Cristobal is still dealing with a lot of first-year head coaching problems. This is just, he inherited a team that had a lot of holes, and I think we're seeing that. here play out early in the season. On the other side, I mean, North Carolina has holes too. I mentioned their defense, but they've got a lot established on the offensive side of the ball. Drake Mays looked great early in the season. My North Carolina's catching 4.5 in this spot. Seems a little bit high to me. Coming off a bye week, we'll find out a lot about, how much that culture has really changed at Miami. I think it takes more than 1 year to change a culture on a widespread scale, but we'll see how much pride those Miami players have, because that loss 2 weeks ago is embarrassing. This is a really tough matchup here. More tough than I think this line indicates. I think this is more like a toss-up game, quite honestly. How about Illinois? Illinois last week goes into Madison and they got Paul Chryst fired. They go in and beat Wisconsin 34-10 in Camp Randall. My storyline heading into this week is Illinois legit? And, I think we'll find out a little bit more this week because they're facing off against Iowa. They're 3.5-point favorites at home in this game, with Chase Brown for Illinois is performing at an elite level at that running back position. You saw it again this past week against Wisconsin. This is by far, though, their toughest competition from an offensive perspective this season. I said it earlier in the episode. I think Iowa's defense is top 5 in the country. They've moved down a little bit here these past 2 weeks. At one point, they were right behind Georgia as the number 2 defense in the country, more like 3 or 4 right now. Nevertheless, though, I mean, this Iowa defense might have the best linebacking core in college football, led by Jack Campbell. They're good up front. They're physical up front. They're reliable in the secondary. Have a hard time seeing Tommy DeVito throw on this Iowa defense. So Chase Brown is probably going to have to carry them to a win here, and it's going to be tough to do that against this Iowa defense. But we'll find out just how legit Illinois is in this spot. I mean, you would think their defense will be able to get stops because Iowa's offense is Iowa's offense. I think we all understand that. I guess from an Iowa perspective, more so my message is, as bad as the offense is, the defense is better. I do think unless they're playing a team like Michigan, who's got a really explosive offense, I do think they'll be in every game they play. And I think Iowa is not as bad as a team as people think. It's just their offense. But this is a top 5 defense in the country. We'll see if Chase Brown can keep it rolling. I don't think any of us on a national stage thought we'd be talking about Illinois as a potential Big 10 West contender. This game in Champaign on Saturday has major Big 10 West implications. All right, how about Spencer Rattler? Spencer Rattler was obviously a 5-star, can't-miss prospect coming out of high school. He goes to Oklahoma, and I think people have this perception that, Spencer Rattler was a bust at Oklahoma. I don't have that perception, I would pride myself on being a pretty big Big 12 guy. Being a Texas fan, I followed Spencer Rattler pretty closely. He didn't play well in big games, made some inopportune turnovers, especially against Texas. I mean, he got benched against Texas these past 2 years, and last year's game was when he lost the starting job to Caleb Williams. But he was a good overall player at Oklahoma. Now he's at South Carolina. Definitely has a lot less around him than he did as a Sooner. It hasn't been the best start to the season. Even in some of their inferior games, he just hasn't really passed the eye test. I will say it's been a pretty tough start to South Carolina's schedule. I mean, they went on the road to Fayetteville. With where that program is at right now, that's not a game that you can realistically expect them to win, especially early in the season. Maybe if they catch them late in the year, it'd be a little bit more competitive. I mean, Spencer Rattler did throw for almost 400 yards in that game, though. But then, playing Georgia at home the next week, with those kind of teams early in the season that still have a lot to improve on, still have some pretty glaring holes, not going to necessarily knock South Carolina for not being able to compete in those games. This game, though, going into Lexington this weekend, I know you're 10.5-point underdogs on the road in this spot. If you're a South Carolina fan, this is a game that you think that you have a chance to win. It's not like you're playing Georgia where, it's not a matter of if we're going to lose. It's, are we going to keep it close? You can realistically go in here and beat Kentucky. There's this perception around Kentucky, and we've heard it just throughout the season, and it's mind-numbing. I hate it, about Will Levis and his arm talent and all this and all that. Well, Will Levis is not a great college quarterback. He might not even be a really good college quarterback. He's an above-average player. He's got tools. Tools do not equal success in really anything. He doesn't have the it factor. So this is not as hard of a matchup, in my opinion, as some would lead you to believe it is. Kentucky's got major issues on the offensive line, and every team they've played has been able to take advantage of it. That's where I'll give Will Levis a little bit of a pass. We're going to find out a lot about Spencer Rattler this week. Personally, I think South Carolina has the ability to go in there and win this game. I don't think they have, a ton of matchup advantages on paper, but which Spencer Rattler are we going to get on Saturday night in Lexington? Big question here entering week 6. All right, how about the Battle of the Independents in Las Vegas, Nevada, of all places? Notre Dame playing in Las Vegas. Seems a little bit BYU and Notre Dame, two religious schools playing in the city of sin. How about that? If you told Lou Holtz about 30 years ago you're playing in Las Vegas, he might have resigned on the spot. You got BYU and Notre Dame this week. In my opinion, this might be one of my favorite games to watch here this upcoming Saturday. BYU is a legit football team. They got a legit quarterback in Jaron Hall. They've had some playmakers that have been hurt early in the season, but they should be healthy enough by now. They got a good offensive line. I do think their defense is attackable, but this is going to be a barn burner of a game. Obviously, and I was on Notre Dame when they played North Carolina. I mean, the edge for Notre Dame in the trenches in that game was just silly. The wrong team was favored in that game. I was right, thank God, because I took a lot of flack for that pick. Good for them. They beat North Carolina. That was a big win. It got some of the heat, some of the early heat off of Marcus Freeman's back. But this is a totally different matchup. Neutral site. It's the much worse travel spot for Notre Dame, a cross-country trip. Pretty easy travel spot if you're BYU. And they played in Las Vegas actually last year, early in the season against Arizona. So they are used to this situation. Notre Dame, even amidst that one against North Carolina, still got a backup quarterback. Still don't have a lot of good playmakers outside of Michael Mayer on that offense. As good as they are in the trenches, unless you're just facing a team that's truly bad in the trenches, like North Carolina, that's only going to get you so far. And we saw that in their first 3 games. I'm not going to lock it in yet. I lean towards BYU in this spot. This is a game I circled preseason as just a spot that I did think BYU would come through in. I think BYU is a better football team than Notre Dame, plain and simple. Just know, Saturday night, Las Vegas, Nevada, BYU, Notre Dame, a battle of the independents. One of my favorite games here on this week 6 slate. All right, just 2 more storylines here. We got 2 ACC teams that I think are legit, that I think are, still have all their goals in front of them, and both, have the opportunity to have pretty good years. Florida State at NC State this week. Obviously, Florida State with a pretty, I don't know if you want to call it an inexcusable home loss. Obviously, pretty disappointing, though, losing by 10 against Wake Forest. The more I watch that game, I'm really not that concerned about Florida State moving forward. I think Wake Forest, with Sam Hartman and his experience, he's got a good set of wide receivers. I guess if I were to be concerned about one thing, I was surprised at Wake Forest's effectiveness running the football, because that's not a strength of theirs. And so maybe, you might worry about Florida State's run defense a bit, but North Carolina State couldn't run the ball this past week against Clemson. That hasn't been their strength this year either. Clearly kind of a gut-wrenching loss if you're North Carolina State. Playing at Clemson, I think they realistically thought they were going to go in there and win that game. NC State's got a really good defense. And even though DJ Uiagalelei stepped up, I haven't changed my opinion of that. This is a heavyweight matchup in the ACC, and neither of these teams are probably going to be in the ACC title game, but the overall health of the ACC has improved. If these 2 teams, the quality of these 2 teams, aren't going to be in your championship game, it's really going to come down to which team can respond quicker. If you're NC State, you circled the Clemson game preseason and you didn't come through. Well, you better bounce back quick, because Florida State's going to be ready to play, and they got talent on the outside. Jordan Travis is probably better than Devin Leary, and Florida State can run the football. So should be a really good game in Raleigh. And I'll finish off with this. I saved the best for last, because it's never too late to troll some Aggies. Obviously, Texas A&M, Jimbo Fisher versus Nick Saban. Texas A&M beat Alabama in College Station last year. Well, they're going to Tuscaloosa this weekend, 24.5-point underdogs. Obviously, Texas A&M has had, a pretty notable season up to this point. They're 3-2. I can't believe they've only played 5 games, because it feels like this has been an 8-year season with the amount of storylines coming out of College Station. Obviously, though, maybe the biggest storyline in this game is just the overall beef that Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban had this summer. I'd kind of forgotten about that until I saw some clips resurface on Twitter this week. There is some bad blood there, especially on Jimbo Fisher's side. He's got bigger problems, though. His offensive system is outdated. We've clearly seen that through 5 weeks. That's not an issue that's going to get resolved this year. So I didn't think there was any chance A&M was going to compete with Alabama last year. And Zach Calzada just flat out executed the game plan. I think Jimbo's game plan is just a little bit too complex, especially in the modern day of college football. But I mean, if a guy executes at that level, it's not going to matter. And I think it's what we saw last year. So never say never. And I've already said that here in this episode, but realistically, this is a game Bama should be able to take care of business. Will Bryce Young play? If Jalen Milroe is needed to start this game, how effective can he be as a passer throughout a 60-minute game? I do think Jalen Milroe opens up that Alabama offense in just that defenses that have to account for the quarterback run in a way they probably don't have to with Bryce Young, but you'd still love Bryce Young in there with his ability as a vertical passer and just the arm talent he has, the Heisman Trophy winner. Certainly going to want him in there. This was designated as the SEC on CBS night game. There's only one of those a year, obviously, with a 24.5-point spread. Maybe that was a little bit of a premature move, but no, this has developed into somewhat of a rivalry with A&M winning last year. I think that's warranted. From a fan perspective, I hope this goes one way. And funny enough, last year when A&M beat Alabama, it was the same day that we gave up that comeback loss to Oklahoma. So safe to say that was a bad day to be me. Hopefully the tide turns this year. All right, guys, appreciate y'all watching the video. Let me know below how you think of this new format. Like I said, I was coming on Sundays and kind of recapping the weekend with the editing, with just the overall vision I have for this channel. By the time those videos were getting put out, and people had time to see them, consume them, people are already moved on to the following week. So I think going forward, I'm going to do a storyline episode, get everybody familiarized with that upcoming Saturday slate, and we'll go from there. So hope y'all enjoyed the video, and be sure to like the video, guys. That really helps out what I'm trying to build here. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the upcoming content. Like I said at the beginning, I'm going to have 20 separate individual game video breakdowns here for this week 6 slate. We're going to give previews and predictions in all of those games. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. And just to remind you once again, go to proud90.com for all your golf apparel needs. The link will be in the description for that, or go to proud90.com. Code Fordham gets you 15% off at checkout. All right, guys, I'll be back in a few days, and I'll start to roll out these individual game video breakdowns. All right, want to take a break in the action real quick. I know you've been staring at the shirt the whole time, going with the space theme today. If you're looking at the specimen on your screen and saying, how can I look as cool and sexy as that guy on my screen? I'll tell you, proud90.com. Unique but very comfortable polos as well. They've also got t-shirts, hoodies, quarter zips. They recently added a ladies line. Proud 90's got all your golf apparel needs. Go to proud90.com. That's proud90.com. Browse their selection. If you see anything you like at checkout, use code Fordham. Going to get you 15% off your entire order. Code Fordham gets you 15% off your entire order. Support me, support Proud 90. The rest of the information will be in the description. Let's get right back into the video.